If you are a frequent listener to the podcast, you know that we have been sponsored by Fuji Sports for quite some time now. Whether you're looking for apparel, equipment, bags, or accessories, Fuji Sports has got it covered. Go to fujisports.com to see the latest selection of everything you need for your Jiu-Jitsu, Judo, or MMA journey. That's fujisports.com. Let me take a minute to tell you about RŌL TV. If you're looking to take your Jiu-Jitsu to the next level and supplement your BJJ education, then RŌL TV has you covered. RŌLAcademy.tv has over 1,500 videos covering individual techniques, positions, and concepts, including seminars and workshops with top-level competitors and instructors like Chris Wojcik, Robert Drysdale, Aaron Hurley, Emily Kwok, and more. Whether you are a beginner or a more advanced student, RŌL TV is the online platform that can take your jiu-jitsu to the next level. What's up, everyone, and welcome back. If you haven't already, please hit the like, share, subscribe, download, listen, and whatever other button there is, and leave a review wherever you do listen. This helps us bring you the great guests and amazing content that you've come to expect. On this episode, Thomas and his guests discuss the balance between knowledge and skill, the impact of online learning, and the unique lifestyle that Jiu-Jitsu offers. They also share insights on aging in the sport, the role of instructors, and the significance of continuous learning and adaptation. Here's the RŌL Radio with the curator of the Art of Skill YouTube channel, the founder of Old Grappler Summit, and a BJJ black belt under Roy Dean, Rick Ellis.
Welcome to RŌL Radio.
And we are live. One and only Rick Ellis. Welcome to the show. Once again, welcome back. How are you?
Thank you so much, Thomas. It's so great to be here. I'm doing fantastic, man, and it's great to catch up with you again. It's been a minute since I was on the podcast, and a lot has changed in my life, so it'll be fun to catch up.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I actually looked it up. Episode 115, that was September of 22. 3 years. Almost 3 years, 2.5. Time flies, huh?
I was marveling that I've been in California for about 3 years now, and
Yeah.
it's where did the time go? It's like,
So
it's funny. It's like there's that joke of when you get older, time goes faster. It's like the roll of toilet paper. It goes faster when it gets toward the core.
Now I have that visual. Thanks. I mean, but things have changed, right? I mean, time flies by. I feel like that's very much so relevant to even Jiu-Jitsu itself. Like when we are starting, it feels very heavy, very overwhelming oftentimes. It feels like there is so much to learn, to sponge, to process. And then longer we train, longer we are on the mat, things kind of slow down, don't they?
Yeah, I think there's something to that. I think the impulse when you're new at jiu-jitsu is you want to master this thing quickly, and you don't realize just how deep of an art it is. And, everyone says, 10 years for a black belt, but you don't really internalize that until you're in the trenches learning this thing and you're confronted by all the failure in jiu-jitsu. It's one of those arts where you will fail far more in your journey, at least in the earlier stages of the journey, than you will have success. And so, yeah, I think you're right. You go through those initial phases of jiu-jitsu and then you kind of settle into a groove. I think part of that is also lifestyle. People go to jiu-jitsu because they think, I want to learn self-defense, I want to get in shape. But eventually, with enough training, those things become secondary to the primary reason you train, which is the community and the physiological reset and all the benefits we get of jiu-jitsu. So I think some of that you mentioned is just kind of settling into a groove, knowing that this is a lifestyle and a long-term proposition, not something you're going to master quickly.
But that's hard to process at the very beginning, right? Like when we getting into this thing, when we visiting an academy, wherever it is, for very, very first time, when we have this thought of, well, let me try this. This whole lifestyle idea, it seems unreachable often, right?
Yeah, well, most people quit at white belt And then the ones that don't quit at white belt, most of them quit at blue belt. So yeah, there's an attrition rate, and nobody, nobody tells you why they quit. But I suspect that a lot of people are confronted by the difficulties of this thing. And, it's hard on the ego. The ego suppression is something that you have to, do constantly. Even as a black belt, you have to suppress your ego. You're not going to have a great night every night. You're going to have nights where you feel like you failed. And so I think those that survive are able to kind of transcend some of those emotional hits that I think are common early in the journey.
Well, let me ask you this then. And I just recently had a similar conversation. And if we know what the problem is with people having difficulty, with people leaving, people not completing, you said it yourself, most quit at white, some of them quit at blue, and then the few remaining continue.
Right.
If we know what the problem is, how come this is so difficult to fix? Why can't we just fix this problem? Like, wouldn't life be much easier if we just correct this from the get-go?
Well, this is not unique to jiu-jitsu. How many people decide to learn to play the guitar and stick with it their whole life? Very, very few. It's, there's an attrition to just about every activity that people do. I think fundamentally, in a lot of ways, people are quitters. People don't really stick with a lot of things that they do. They dabble in a lot of things. So I'm not sure how you solve it in jiu-jitsu. Maybe there should be some kind of on-ramp where you try to prepare people maybe emotionally a little bit for the fact that it's difficult. But in, our participation trophy day and age, people don't want to do the hard things, they want the easy road.
No, I'm with you there. I'm with you there. It seems like we often seek the easier route, the route with the least amount of obstacles, and trying to, I don't know if avoid the hard things, but definitely the hard things give us a hard time. Is that how you felt when at the beginning of all of this? I mean, you've been on the mat for a bit
20
now.
years, yeah.
20 years, right? Is that looking back 2 decades? Is that how you felt at the very beginning of this?
I am a bit of an obsessive personality type. And whenever I get into things, I have this insatiable need to try to master it. And so I don't think I had that. And in part, I don't think I had that because I was, one of Roy Dean's very first students when he opened his school. It was, me and a guy named Jimmy. And I had met Roy 6 months earlier, and he and I became friends, and we started emailing all the time. And I helped him set up his website for his school, and I helped that transition when he moved to Oregon to start the school. And so I think just the fact that I was very close to him and I didn't want to disappoint him and myself, and I was really loving the process, that I don't think I felt any of that. Man, I never felt an urge to quit. And I think I might have mentioned it on the last episode. I think, by virtue of the fact that I was one of the first students there, I immediately became one of the senior students, as ludicrous as it is to be a white belt, but yet you're the senior student. And I think there's something that happens when you have some responsibility placed on your shoulders, because all of the early guys that came to that academy, I mean, I could rattle them off. There's like 10, 11, 12 of these guys. None of them quit, and they all became black belts, which is a huge percentage. I mean, that's, seems kind of implausible normally. And I think there's something about being, helping the instructor sort of carry the message and being, seen as a senior instructor. You don't want to let anybody down.
Why do you think that doesn't exist today?
Well, at an established school, and I went through this when I ran my school, you put so much energy into that first generation of students because you're motivated and you're excited and you've got this new school you're trying to build, and you're trying to, initially you want to get it in the black so you can make some money. And, but eventually, students come and go. It takes on a whole different character. It no longer has that kind of personal quality that it has in the early stages where you have a finite group of students. Maybe eventually you have hundreds of students. And so, you just can't devote that kind of attention. It just becomes a very different thing. And I do wonder if I had just been a random student, among 200, would I have felt some of the things that you're you're talking about, and maybe so. I don't have a way to to know that.
Well, another point to acknowledge through all of this is the fact that's 2 decades ago, right? Things have changed. The
Right.
jiu-jitsu has changed. It has
lot.
evolved quite a bit, right?
Staggeringly. It's almost hard to remember what things were like now because it's so different now.
Yeah, I mean, I often talk about my beginnings with my students, and some of the stories are almost unbelievable in a sense, like this would never happen today. Like, things just work differently. Not that right or wrong. It's just 2 decades ago, it was a very different world itself. But then jiu-jitsu was very different. The way how we taught things were very different.
Yeah.
How the community was structured was very different, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. Jiu-jitsu was much more proprietary in those days, where if you trained at one academy, you don't dare venture outside to another academy. This cross-pollination didn't exist. YouTube wasn't even a thing yet. So, now it's open source jiu-jitsu. And so there's just a fire hose of techniques coming onto your phone every day. And so there's this openness, and there's an evolution, and there's only so many ways to manipulate the body and choke somebody out, but yet we're seeing more and more techniques emerge every day, more setups and more ways to do that. So yeah, it's taken on a completely different feel for sure. It's a maturing art. And I think we're in the golden age of jiu-jitsu right now.
So is this a better thing versus what we experienced as at the beginning?
I think overall, probably so. In the beginning, there were not very many schools, and I postponed starting jiu-jitsu. I wanted to start it in 1993 when I saw Royce Gracie. But where do you go to learn jiu-jitsu? And, it would be a decade later that, or a little more than a decade later, that I'd have an opportunity to really train. So, yeah, I think it's a lot better in a lot of ways. Certainly the information is much more ubiquitous. And, people argue that there's a lot of McDojos now and the quality is going down. But, all things are a bell curve. There are exceptional people. There are, losers. It's the bell curve effect. So most jiu-jitsu schools, I think, are pretty decent. There are exceptional ones and there's some terrible ones. But, I don't know.
Do you feel that after 2+ decades being involved in this amazing thing that we love, do you feel that you personally carry a certain responsibility? I mean, many people look up to you as one of the OGs, I mean, one of the guys who not only present on social media, but you've built a certain branding, certain presence around yourself, and rightfully so. Do you feel that there is a responsibility on you to carry on that torch as one of the first black belts on the Roy Dean, as one of the first originals?
Yeah, maybe a little bit. I don't really think about that too much in terms of personal responsibility. I'm still enjoying it. I suppose if there comes a point where it's no longer, well, as Roy Dean says, he says, the art needs to serve you. When the art stops serving you, then that's the time to quit. And it doesn't have to be something you do forever. Again, if it's no longer serving what you need physically, emotionally, mentally, it's no longer giving you those things that you need. So, but thus far, it's still an amazing art. Really, it's just the fact that I'm getting older. I just turned 61. And I can tell you, man, the body hurts in a way today that even 2 years ago wasn't as much. It's a progressive thing where I'm seeing my physical attributes, starting to fail me a little bit, even though I'm lifting weights and I'm doing mobility and I do all this stuff to try to keep the machine going. But
that's extraordinary. I mean, I'm right behind you. I'm nearly my 50s, so I'm not far behind you, and I can completely share some of the wear and tear, if you will, from just simply doing this every day. But I'm wondering if there is a way around this, in a sense. I mean, it's extraordinary for me somebody at 60, over 50, doesn't matter, over 40, to continue doing this. When I look back 20 years ago when we were starting, there was no 40-year-olds doing this. There was no 50-year-olds doing this. There was no division in IBJJF for 50-year-olds. Like,
Right,
these
right.
things didn't exist, right? So it is this where this is going from a evolution perspective, that truly guys who are in their 40s, 50s, 60s are able to efficiently continue this?
You know, it's funny. My friend Lawrence Dunning, who's a great black belt out of Chicago, he says that jujitsu is the new golf. You know, and then I've also heard jujitsu is the new midlife crisis. You know, so you're seeing two things. You're seeing athletes that started younger, but now 20 years later, they're middle age or older, and you're also seeing a lot of people discovering it at an older age. You know, I run camps. I run something called
Mhm.
Old Grappler Summit, and I have a big one coming up in October in San Diego at a beautiful retreat center. And so we get people from 40 into their 70s that show up. And this woman named Mary, two-stripe white belt, shout out to Mary, uh, she showed up in her 70s. She's starting her journey. So there's something about jujitsu. I don't quite know what the appeal is. I've been in it so long, I can't see it from the outside, why someone at an older age would jump into it. Although I was 41 when I started. So, I was older myself.
Is jiu-jitsu for the guys in their 60s, 70s, the same as it's for the ones who are 20 or 30?
No, I think when you're 20 and 30, certainly, well, I mean, I guess it depends on what your goal is. If you're 20 and your goal is to become a competitor, well, you have a body that's going to give you what it needs to be able to accomplish that goal in a way that it's just not going to work if you're 50 years old. I mean, sure, you can go compete in your 50s, but if you see competition as a pathway to becoming, known in jiu-jitsu, that's very hard when you're older. So I think the nature of it changes. I think also you can't break yourself. Or you can break yourself in jiu-jitsu, so you have to be smart about not breaking yourself. And so I think the way that we train when we're older, accepting that you're not going to be as effective just because you don't have a body that can give you. I mean, look, I'm a black belt and I'm not as effective as I would be if I was a 25-year-old version of me. If you could take my brain and stick it into a 25-year-old version of me, I would play a much more dynamic style of game, and things would be a little bit different. So I do think the nature of training changes, but generally I think people, they get the same benefits of jiu-jitsu. You get all that, camaraderie and all of those things, even if you're older, for sure.
Wouldn't that be a little confusing for those who are just starting, in the sense of, if you are younger, the jiu-jitsu is different. If you're older, jiu-jitsu is different. What are you trying to achieve? What is your focus? Where are you? Do you want to be a competitor, or do you want to focus on self-defense? Do you want to do this for community, or do you want to do this to be a technician? Like, there's a lot of avenues here that this really can go. And one will say, like, this is the beauty of jiu-jitsu. This is why this is so amazing. This is why it's so diverse, right? But I'm thinking, like, if somebody's coming in today for very, very first time, it's like, what? This is confusing as hell. Like, what am I supposed to do? I don't know if I want to compete or not. I don't know if I want to smash somebody or I want to be smashed. Like, what are you talking about, Thomas? Like, you are insane.
Well, I think some of those things aren't quite apparent right at the beginning. The various styles, the way that we can play jiu-jitsu. There's a slower, more incremental pressure style of jiu-jitsu, or there's a more dynamic, movement-based. And I don't think that people really even understand that at the beginning. They just show up and they start experiencing it. I think as you gain skill, you start seeing, the various pathways that you might be drawn to.
Do you feel that this is the beauty of this art? If we compare this to others, and perhaps we shouldn't, but if we do, many do, if we compare this to judo or even wrestling or taekwondo or many other traditional arts, there is a very clear path that's set by many of them. This is what you need to do. This is your point of success. It's a success or failure scenario. Versus in jiu-jitsu, it's a little more fluid.
Well, it's a very open martial art, and that's one of the huge advantages of it. Judo used to be much more like the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu we play now. It had a ground game. It had a lot more components, but it's the rule set that constrains the game. And judo became an Olympic sport, and wrestling is a sport. And so it's constrained to a much smaller box. Whereas Jiu-Jitsu, it's more of a free-form expression. The goal is to get a choke or get a joint lock or dominate your opponent. And however you accomplish that, as long as you're doing it within the bounds of fair play, is totally acceptable.
Is that the appealing part behind it?
Well, I don't know if that's the appealing part behind it. Well, maybe part of the appealing part of it in that it lets you kind of personalize the jiu-jitsu to whatever you can offer. And jiu-jitsu is one of those arts that allows you to be effective regardless of your physical attributes. You can find a way to play jiu-jitsu in a way that minimizes your weaknesses and maximizes your strength. You're smaller, you can operate into smaller pockets, you can do certain things with your body, you're quicker, you're bigger, you're constrained by that. And so, yeah, there's a personalization there that I think is really powerful. Not everybody, in Taekwondo, you're expected to be able to kick a certain way, and that's kind of that. Whereas in Jiu-Jitsu, you can, really make it be whatever you want it to be.
Yeah, and definitely creates the diversity for individuals customizing this to ourselves, essentially, right? Especially deeper we go into this, right? More we learn, more we explore, deeper the ocean becomes, and more exploration there can be if we choose to go that route. Yeah.
Yeah, the depth of jiu-jitsu is amazing. You don't realize. I mean, I've been a black belt for a little bit now, and I'm, every year the epiphanies get deeper and deeper. So it's just a profound art.
Isn't that interesting when we are at the beginning of this? Let's just say white belt or perhaps blue belt, but I think more prominent as white belt. We feel like, at least I felt like, and many talk about it, to establish this knowledge base. I want to get to this point. Like, we want to anchor things, we want to achieve things. But the closer we get to black belt, especially after we achieve the black belt, it becomes way more fluid. Like, there's no ending to this. Yeah. It's actually broader. It's broader than we imagine.
Yeah. Yeah, very much so. You don't realize it's, Dunning-Kruger effect, that it takes skill. It takes skill in a domain to accurately assess your skill in that domain. And so the more skill you have, the more you realize how little you really know.
Yeah.
And, I'm training with Clark Gracie every day and training with absolute killers down here in San Diego. So I'm reminded every day that there are massive levels to this game. And, I'll watch him teach a technique, and it's a technique that I teach, but the details, right? His details are so precise, and sometimes they're different than the details that I emphasize. And I'm like, why do you emphasize that hand placement as opposed to this, which is the more common way? And I'll say, because there's a counter. He's operating on this just higher level of understanding. And if you stay on the road, you will have those epiphanies as well over time, and they're never ending.
Well, that's the beautiful part, at least in my mind, is that, one would think that after a certain time we achieve a certain level of expertise, but then there is always somebody who will question that status quo and perhaps make one little change that changes everything, the small detail that impacts everything. And it makes me at least realize that there's layers to all of this, and what we don't know, we don't know.
Well, it's the details that allow you to be effective. You might learn an arm bar on your first day of class as a white belt, but you don't have the details worked out. You don't have the setups worked out, the control. Maybe you don't know how to pivot and elevate your hips properly yet. You don't know all those things. So, the difference between someone that can execute an arm bar against an elite level person versus the white belt, well, it's the details and the timing and the, all that. So,
so with that being said, should we focus on knowledge acquisition as a broad idea, meaning more information I gain, the more options I have? Or should we be focusing on depth of the information, meaning I just know 3 things,
Yeah.
but I know them to the level of detail that nobody can stop.
Yeah. I think it's more related to what phase of the journey you're on, because when you're a white belt, there is so much to learn. You've got to learn all the 4 major positions. You've got to learn some of the minor positions, attacks, defenses, all that stuff. And so I just don't think it's possible to become a specialist and to go deeply into one thing yet. And I always liken it to being a fisherman. You cast a net, big wide net initially because you're trying to catch as many different kinds of fish as possible. But later, and usually it's that kind of blue to purple transition where you start shifting how you think about jiu-jitsu, and you become, a fisherman with a rod and a reel. You want to go catch that specific fish, and you become a more of a specialist, stripping away the things that aren't really part of your game and becoming extraordinary at the things that are part of your game.
Is this natural progress for many? Do we realize at which point we need to focus on things, or is this something that's being guided by
I don't
the
think
instructor or the environment?
I don't think it's guided too much, because it's the progression of jiu-jitsu is so mysterious. What do I need to do to get to blue belt? What do I need to do to get to purple belt? Like, no one can
Like
seem
$1 million
to answer.
question every day that everybody asks, right?
And nobody can seem to answer those questions. One of the reasons I'm grateful that I came up under the Roy Dean lineage was that there was a pretty good sense of what you needed to do to get to that next level, because you had to demonstrate techniques. You had to, you're tested for this stuff. So there was kind of that thing. But I think for most people, it's a little bit mysterious. But I do think that people in that kind of mid to late stage blue, getting to purple belt, they have to make that shift, that mentality shift of, instead of becoming a technique collector, you become someone that begins going deeper into the techniques that constitute your game. And if you can't make that switch, it's likely that you may never get to purple belt, because the purple belt is sort of that gateway into the advanced game that allows you to, be more effective at a higher level.
So whose responsibility is this? And I think this is like the pivot of why I wanted you to be on this in this conversation. I feel like this is the hardest thing to answer for many people, and I think instructors and the students. Whose job is this? Is this the student's responsibility to, owning and saying, hey, I need to know these things? Or is it the instructors, or even the head instructor of the academy or association, to say, here is A to Z, you need to know this, you need to perform this, otherwise you're not moving up? Well, does it really matter? Do we really care?
Well, I think it's the responsibility of both parties ultimately, and especially so in the early stages of jiu-jitsu, you're getting most of your knowledge from your instructor because you don't know the game at all. But eventually it becomes a much more self-directed activity. And John Danaher talks about this, that at some point you have to take control of your journey and your development. And you're going to class, you're learning things from your coach, but it tends to be a little random by virtue of, the nature of how we learn jiu-jitsu. And so as you get more skilled, you begin having little mini projects where there's certain areas of interest, certain things that are kind of working for you, but maybe not enough. So you do a deep dive into that, or there's something you want to add to your game. So I think that ultimately, if you want to get very skilled at jiu-jitsu, you have to take control of your own skill acquisition.
At which point does that switch take place?
Again, I think that shift begins to happen, I think, in that blue to purple transition, because it goes, the purple belt is a very different, conceptually, it's a very different player than a blue belt. A blue belt is still operating on kind of a single dimension. One attack, there's a defense, you kind of reset back to nothing, you try another attack, they defend, you reset back to nothing. And, so it's all kind of one dimensional. Whereas the purple belt, you are learning to combine techniques, and you're working on having that follow-up attack. You're learning that, oh, if I want the arm, I can attack the neck. So you become a little, more intelligent about how you go about that. And you learn to, ride people's momentum better. You learn to transition better. You've trained how to move your body enough now that you should be pretty fluid. So I really think it's in that zone where you begin thinking about your game more deeply. And I do think that you don't have to obsess throughout your entire jiu-jitsu journey, but I do think at certain periods you need to obsess. And to me, that late stage, mid to late stage blue into purple belt, you are well served if you obsess a little bit about jiu-jitsu and really begin, thinking more deeply about those connections. I tell people to flowchart their game, that sort of thing.
You become a nerd. I mean,
yeah, you have to become a bit of a nerd. Absolutely.
Yeah. Many consider purple belt the most fun part of their journey. Did you find the same for your experience?
Purple belt's a great place to be because you have the skill without the pressure.
Yes.
You're
like the youngest child.
Yeah.
Like you can get in trouble. Nobody will tell you anything about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Once you get the brown belt, you start feeling some pressure because you're an almost black belt.
Yeah.
And you feel like, oof, I have to, represent this in a way that purple, you can be a little more carefree. So yeah, I would agree with that.
How was this in your mind when you were during that stage of purple belt? Did you feel careless, free, experimental?
I've always been a jiu-jitsu nerd going all the way back to the beginning. And by the time I was a purple belt, I owned at least 100 instructional DVDs. And so, I was always someone that was thinking about jiu-jitsu. And, again, I'm a little OCD. But I ended up moving. So I left the Roy Academy as a purple belt, and I moved to Hawaii, where I trained with Luis Heredia for a year. And so I did feel some pressure when I went into that environment because, first of all, in Hawaii, they love to fight. Nicest people in the world, they'll hug you, they're your best friends. But when it's time to go, it's time to go. And I'm not sure I was fully prepared for that when I showed up. I was like, holy cow, this is intense. And so I think I did. And then, you're coming in from a different lineage and, I wanted to, there's that question oftentimes in your jiu-jitsu journey. Certainly by the time you get to brown belt, you'll have these questions. And that is, does my technique hold up? Am I really this belt? If I go train in Brazil, will my belt hold up? If I go train here or there? And so I think I had those kinds of questions. Am I going to do?
How did you mentally get through these? Because I think that's a real serious topic on the forefront of many students. Do I hold up?
Yeah.
Do I go to ABC Academy in a very small town, and does my blue belt hold up? Or if I go to a large association like Alliance or perhaps Atos, will I hold up? And there is differences between the levels, right?
Yeah,
and do we even have a right? Should we even be looking at ourselves in that sense, meaning comparing ourselves to other people? And do I hold up? Is this right? Should I be wearing this?
Well, we wear colored belts that signify rank. So I think there is a natural desire to represent your belt perfectly. And, I've done many videos on that subject of, you're wearing a purple belt and you feel like you need to be able to tap everybody blue belt and below. And so I think it's part of that same.
But let me challenge you there for a second. And I know you've done a lot of videos on this. This is the intriguing part, right? If we don't have rules around what is expected of a specific belt, there's very fluid expectations behind different age groups and different goal settings, why would we compare ourselves to somebody else who might be completely in different brackets?
Yeah. Well, we shouldn't compare ourselves ultimately, but again, we're wearing belts that signify rank, and the way you progress in jiu-jitsu is to get to the next rank is by becoming more skilled so that you can be more dominant against your people at your current or older rank. So yeah, I don't think there's any solution to that. It's a performance-based martial art, which is a beautiful thing. We're not just doing kata. And look, I did Japanese jiu-jitsu before Brazilian
Hmm.
jiu-jitsu, and there was no sparring in that environment. And I can tell you that the egos were massive in that room. People with, that look like they haven't done a push-up in 20 years would walk around with their chest puffed out because they're wearing a darker belt than the others. And it was just assumed that if your belt was darker, you were way more
Yeah.
badass than the people that aren't. And so in jiu-jitsu, we have that reality check and that ego smash that comes with it.
Yeah, that's the interesting old school approach to all of this, to the ranking itself, and some of it visible still to this day in other scenarios. Recently, you made a video about 5 levels of skill acquisition, which kind of links into what we are talking about here. How we gaining these skills, how we project this knowledge acquisition and putting it in our library essentially, and utilizing at specific times. And one of the things that came to my mind as I was listening to you and kind of thinking about this is the black belt level considered as a competent person, which put it in the middle of that skill set acquisition, or is it an expert?
Well, it depends on who you're comparing that to.
Right.
If you're comparing it to someone who's been a black belt for 20 years and continues to train at a high level, then yeah, the early stage black belt is a novice. I mean, that's, imagine 20 more years of training, and you're pretty far along too. You're what, a third degree, I think.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm sure you're starting to see that too, where, yeah, and I'll tell this to Clark Gracie. I'm like, can you even feel the difference between a regular black belt and a purple belt at your level? Do you even feel any difference there? Because they're so far down the road.
Well, so how do we approach this from that perspective? Because it feels like, based on what you're saying right now, is further we get away, further we train, more we train, that there is a certain level of we are diluting the feeling, right? Because everything becomes so compressed, right? Like the differences between white and blue, blue and purple, and even blue and black becomes much, much, much smaller because we've been black for so long, right?
Yeah. It's sort of like,
how do you process that in your mind?
Yeah, it's like if a 20-year-old woman gives birth to a child, she's 20 times older, but when she's 40 and the child is 20, she's only twice as old,
right?
And so on. So yeah, that I don't know if that's a good analogy, but it's that perspective changes pretty drastically. And I'm looking forward to, it's an interesting race against time, that for those of us that are older, because I want to continue to be more skilled year after year after year, despite the fact that my physical attributes are going in the wrong direction. And so I hope that I can stay in this game long enough to really see what it's like to be a 20-year black belt, looking back at this incredible journey and what my perspective will be then.
Well, and actually, interesting that you bring this up, because I made a note from an earlier comment that you made. So as older as we get, obviously there's a wear and tear, which means our physical components are becoming secondary to our mental capacity, essentially. Yeah. But at the same time, we are gaining more experience. Right. We have more time within this activity.
Right.
At the same time, as a layer on top of it, our mind probably doesn't work the same way. We are not as sharp. And I'm not, taking anything from anybody, but there is no secret that 20-year-old will process information very differently than 50 or 60-year-old.
Yeah.
Right. So are we really getting better, or is there like a tipping point somewhere in the middle where we start, we start losing that skill?
Yeah.
Even though we don't want to, we have a lot of passion. We probably have more passion older we get.
Yeah.
But are we really getting better?
Well, in some ways, I think you can continue to get better. You can certainly get more effective because, the goal is perfect technique. And if you keep chipping away at it and chipping away at it, eventually your execution will be pretty good. And your timing and all those things should be good enough that you can continue to be more effective by measured measured by your ability to maybe get out from disadvantaged positions, maybe dominate someone and ultimately get the tap. But that's just one dimension. Effectiveness is the end result of, it's you reaching the goal, but you can do that even though you may not be improving globally in your game, I guess. I'd have to think that through a little bit more, but
well, those are tough questions, right? I mean, that's it. Now we're taking a really, really deep in there.
Yeah, it's
a puzzle.
It is a puzzle because the nature of how you play jiu-jitsu changes pretty drastically. I mean, I've got videos of myself rolling as a blue belt, and I'm like, who was that guy? I want to be that, I want to be that guy who was just more wild and, dynamic and risk taker and all those things.
Were you wild? Were you a risk taker?
I wasn't, well, I don't know if I would say wild, but I definitely was much more dynamic in the way I moved. And, and I mean, you're a blue belt. You give 100% intensity into everything you see. You see the squirrel and you're going to chase after that squirrel with 1,000%.
I'm with you 100% because I was the worst white and blue belt. Like I was such a meathead. It's not even funny. Like I want to destroy everybody. Like I don't know at which point I became nicer, but but I think everybody goes through these stages, right? And they vary between different people and different timelines and so on. But this is the personal experience that we have while we experience this beautiful thing, right?
There are so many seasons in jiu-jitsu.
I like that. Seasons. I like that.
There's so many seasons, and including seasons where, you might be really frustrated. There are periods of time in your game that you will be frustrated and you'll feel like nothing's working. You'll feel like you're coming to class and you're just, the battle I had tonight was the same one I had yesterday and the day before. And
have you had many of those?
Yeah.
Was there a point where you were done?
Well, I did quit. I thought I quit because I had 2 pretty serious injuries back to back. I blew a disc.
But I'm more talking about mental, like hitting. They call it plateau or flatlining or whatever, however you phrase it.
Yeah.
Have you ever felt that you were just checked out mentally?
Yeah, there've been a lot of times that I've continued to train despite the fact that I wasn't necessarily all that excited about it. It's just a habit. It's what I do. I go train, and you're just going through the motions, not feeling particularly inspired about it. But then you show up to train one night and you have one of those magical nights where all of a sudden everything's working, and maybe you get a glimpse of, it feels like a door opened, and all of a sudden you see this thing in a way that you didn't see it yesterday. And then that kind of re-energizes you and you feel more invigorated to go, train with renewed purpose.
Yeah. I call those epiphanies, jiu-jitsu epiphanies. And sometimes I step back in the corner of the room, just watching the students all throughout the class and, their training sessions. And then the smile, the little spark in the eye shows up. Like, yep, that's it right there. That's it.
Yeah.
Those are good moments, aren't they?
Those are killer moments, but I think it's important to not get too excited when those things happen, because you might think that's the new normal. And then you go to train tomorrow and all of a sudden have another night that's not so great. And then,
then the reality check is in and
right. The reality.
But we also need those, right? Like if we think about it, we need those reality checks. We need those. Sometimes we do need to get smashed. Sometimes we need to get stopped. We need to get submitted. Doesn't that set us in it's like a reality check, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's no getting around it. It's a performance-based martial art. Even though, again, in a lot of ways, it's a self-directed activity, but we need training partners, and they're trying to get better too. And they're figuring out our game as we figure out their game. So failure, there will always be failure. And I think it's good medicine, really, because it keeps the ego in check. I think it makes you more humble. It makes you, appreciate the times when you do well more, right? If it was just if jiu-jitsu was just easy, then why would anybody train? You know,
Is jiu-jitsu hard?
it's very hard, don't you think?
I'm asking you.
Well, I mean, at its core, it's very simple. It's a very simple game, really, at its core. And I think the more skilled you get, I mean, I think the impulse at black belt, especially and beyond, is to simplify your game, to strip away everything that's non-essential and end up with this perfect, efficient, effective core of your game.
I love the irony of all of this. When we start, we want to, many at least, want to know as many things as possible.
Yeah.
We're hunting these flying things, inverting things, and we're not moving in 75 direction at 90 miles an hour. We're not doing jiu-jitsu. And then longer we train, first, things slow down. Two, we remove things instead of inquiring things.
Yeah.
And three, we dig so deep. We get to the bottom and we're not deep enough. We go deeper.
Right.
And isn't it so ironic how all of this flips almost? It's almost like oxymoron in the sense of like this we are going completely opposite direction.
Yeah, you think, why didn't I learn that simplicity on day one instead of, but I don't think it's possible because it's 1,000 epiphanies that allow you to simplify this thing that you're doing, or even seeing the patterns, and you begin saying, wait a second, oh, there's a principle here. All guard passing involves a couple different principles, regardless of how you're passing the guard. Oh, well, that changes everything because now I don't even need to know any particular guard pass. I can just run the principle and invent a guard pass on the fly, you know, to counter some thing that I may not have a specific solution for.
I think, and I might be wrong on this, but I think it was Zanji Rivera was on the show, and he said, Jiu-Jitsu is like two different scenarios. One, you're trying to memorize words for the language you don't know, and it gives you a very limited ability to speak or communicate. Or you learn the alphabet, and you learn how to create your own words, and now you don't have any limits. And it stuck with me in a sense of when, at the very beginning, we really want to memorize things. Oh, I know these, 10 different guard passes, and I do these things, and this is the amount of details, and we're really trying to get to the memorization of all of this.
Yeah.
And then the longer we train, I feel like that we try to understand, not memorize, but understand what is happening, the mechanics behind it.
Yeah, that's
critical.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. And then we take it even step deeper when we find correlations between them. And this is where the principles or the concepts come in. And then it really doesn't matter which pass. This is what you just mentioned. It doesn't matter which pass you do because all they have the same common denominators.
Right.
They all work the same way in a very simplistic way.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, absolutely. And you have to go through the journey to get to that level of understanding, which is amazing. And what's beyond that? What is beyond principles? Are there more deeper epiphanies in 10 years that we will see that we don't see now? I mean, it's a very interesting question.
Do you think this would be easier if we found a recipe to teach this from the very beginning and shrink this learning curve to literally 1 or 2 years?
Well, I do try to inject principles into my teaching wherever it's appropriate. But the thing is, beginners, that's a level of sophistication sometimes that beginners aren't ready for. They just need a lot of, if the opponent does this, do that. But what do I do if they do that? You do this. They need just specific answers because they have no context for the principle. I could tell you, okay, here's a principle of jiu-jitsu, but the techniques that allow you to understand that principle and have context for that principle. So I think it would be difficult to do that. And maybe that's what the ecological guys are trying to do. They're trying to strip away, specific technical learning and instead make it about games around certain principles.
Yeah. I mean, that's a very interesting approach to learning as being introduced in a recent time. Somebody a while back told me, learning jiu-jitsu is like riding a bike in the sense of when you are younger, you cannot get on a road bike. You're just gonna fall off. You're physically, mentally not ready for. You're not ready for the environment. You need to get on the tricycle. Then you got to upgrade to the bike with the little training wheels. Then you got to bend the training wheels. Then you got to remove the training wheels, and then you get to the big boy bike. And then as time goes on, you get on a road bike, and then you think you got it, and then you can go faster. And then wind comes along from the side, and you need to balance. So there was layers to all of this, but skipping steps, not that we can't skip them, we can. It just changes the trajectory, how our success will look like. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, mostly yes. Although using the bike analogy, they are finding that those little tiny bikes that have no pedals that you give your child when they're very young, and it allows them to put their feet down. It lets them skip the tricycle. It lets them skip the bike that has the training wheels, and it lets them learn balance right from the very first moment. And so ultimately that's shortcutting that process. So, the question in jiu-jitsu is, where are those, ways to shortcut that knowledge base so it's, maybe not such a long journey.
And a lot of this comes from how we educate students, right? I mean, this is not only the students getting better, but us as instructors getting better with how we relay their information, right? So it's not necessarily about making shortcuts, but how do we make this better from a learning experience, right?
Yeah. Well, and that just takes teaching a lot, because, I know you go through this and I go through this, that I feel like I learn as much as my students do when I teach, because there's always epiphanies when you're explaining something and then you're watching a room full of people trying to execute that thing you just explained. I mean, the epiphanies are massive,
Do you feel that you're learning more as an instructor or as a student?
I feel like I learn more as an instructor, because you have to keep your head in the game in a way that you don't have to keep your head in the game if you're just a student. And you have to know the entirety of jiu-jitsu and be able to teach it well, not just the things that constitute your A game. And so if you're just a student, especially if you're a competitor, that's very internally focused. You're just going to develop, your game so that you can be successful on the mat. But that's just one way of playing jiu-jitsu. So I think as an instructor, you definitely are able to go deeper into, the nuts and bolts of techniques, and broader as well. So I feel like I learn more when I'm teaching consistently.
Can everybody be an instructor?
Well, teaching is a very different skill set than just being able to execute with your body. You have great competitors that are lousy teachers, and you have teachers like Danaher who have never competed, and yet they're exceptional. So yeah, I think if someone has some basic aptitude for it and they have an interest in it, well, sure, probably anybody can. But it's a bell curve of humans. Not everyone's going to be an exceptional teacher, even though they have desire or interest in it.
Why do you think we are so eager to teach? You often see even white belts teaching white belts,
especially by the time you get to blue belt,
you're an expert.
Well, you know a thing or two about a thing or two at blue belt, so you're ready to share. And
but sharing is one thing, but I think there is an overall umbrella of a desire to step into that role. Do you feel like this is that being on the top of the pyramid, seeking that attention, being the main guy in the room, or is it truly because we want to share things as humans? We want to naturally connect with other people.
Yeah, in some ways, teaching is a little self-aggrandizing, because you're the man, you're the person, right? And there's something about that that can feed the ego. And I think we're all susceptible to that. I have a little YouTube channel and yet I'm surprised that people recognize me all over the place. I was at the airport. Someone was like, "Hey," it's just.
First of all, your YouTube channel is not little, okay? So let's get that out of the way.
I mean, it's all relative, right?
Well, sure it is, but I think it's important to acknowledge some of these things, because you're one of the earlier guys who actually start recording things in the various different ways, and putting things on film and documenting things and speaking your mind in a sense of helping other people. right? I
Yeah.
mean, have you ever thought about it this way and from a global perspective? If nobody ever shot one video on jiu-jitsu, where would jiu-jitsu be today?
Right.
I mean, isn't it? It's almost mind-blowing.
Yeah, we would be back to 2005,
Yeah.
and you know,
Yeah. I mean, like, literally a couple of weeks ago, one of my students says, like, we were talking about it, and I was expressing that when I was starting, forget about BJJ fanatics, okay? Take a step deeper.
Yeah.
Forget about YouTube. Doesn't exist, okay? Take a step deeper. DVDs don't exist.
Mhm.
Take a step deeper.
or they're very few and far between.
But even then, like, VHS was not that popular. We
Yeah.
had books.
Yeah.
Books, and the wheels are spinning in his eyes, and I clearly saw the level of not being able to process this information.
Mhm.
Like, what do you mean that you don't have video?
Right.
Like, have you ever thought about this? How lucky, how spoiled we are today, from a perspective of learning, the accessibility of
and-
information.
Oh, not just jujitsu, in any realm. You see people,
Absolutely.
you know, these prodigies playing guitar on YouTube, that they are a product of being able to absorb all these influences that used to be very difficult. You used to have to get an album and try to slow it down to hear that guitar part. And how do you learn? How do you play this? I have no idea. And now you can just pop on a YouTube video and say, "Oh,
Yeah.
that's how you do it," and boom, now you've accelerated your development. So yeah, it's amazing, really, what the impact that jujitsu has had, or the video has had. And I wouldn't say that I was all that early in that. My instructor Roy Dean, he 2006, when
Mhm.
YouTube came out, he got online and began that process. He was very early. So
Yeah, certainly. I mean, Roy Dean was one of the pioneers of all of this, and
Mhm.
I think his not instructions, but his curriculums were one of the first ones. One, I don't know if they're
Yeah.
the first one, but one of
Yeah.
the first documented. Like I remember those. I
Yeah,
mean,
his instructional blue belt requirements.
Yeah.
Which I filmed. I was standing at the camera on that one, and this was, it wasn't HD TV. It was, 4:3
yeah.
aspect ratio. We had just a camera on a tripod. We hadn't figured out that it looks better if you handhold and follow the action and all that stuff. So
What?
but
I didn't know that you were involved personally in this project.
I've been involved in most of Roy's instructional courses. He and I have been creative partners forever, and so he tends to pull me in on his projects a lot. And
So
yeah.
walk me through this. You are behind the camera, filming Blue Belt requirements for Roy Dean. This is 2006. You said
2006, 2007. Yeah.
okay, somewhere around there. Do you envision for this to have an impact that it has?
No, there was always a sense that he was a very unique and special instructor. I mean, he was always a brilliant communicator. Even as a brown belt, when I met him, he taught a seminar that I attended. And, there was a sense that he just was exceptional. But, you're training with this guy every day. It's, your perspective is a little different. And no, we didn't know. I don't think he knew how successful that project would be. And for years and years, I mean, to this day, it's still his #1 bestseller by a wide margin. I mean, he's sold thousands and thousands of those things.
How would you envision that all of this would look like today if things like that didn't happen? If you didn't have time to film, if Roy Dean didn't have desire, screw this. This is the stupid YouTube stuff. Nobody's going to watch this. Who's going to watch this nonsense? Jiu-Jitsu is going to collapse tomorrow. Like, I mean, this could go a million ways.
Yeah.
Right. Besides the one that it has. Right. So what would all of this look like today in your mind?
Well, what's wild is that even a couple years ago, I mean, everybody's online now. Everybody's doing shorts and TikToks and all the stuff in a way that is mind-blowing, really. And it's by virtue of the fact that we all have a camera in our phone, in our pockets, and all that. So I think it goes in phases. There was that, early kind of the early pioneers of jiu-jitsu on YouTube, which would have been Stephan Kesting, Roy Dean,
Grappler's Guy, Jason
Grappler's
Scully.
Guy, Jason Scully was early. Submissions 101. I mean, there are a few of those guys early.
Marcelo in Action. I mean,
Marcelo
has
MG in Action. Yeah. And then there's kind of that second wave. And I think I was kind of part of that second wave where there's a lot more people doing it, but it was still controlled and it was a lot easier. I look at, when my channel first emerged, I was getting 3,000 new subscribers per month for a long time. And now it's just, there's so many channels. It's so competitive. It's so difficult now that, it's very difficult to get that kind of subscriber growth in a way that you could early on because everyone's.
So does that put us in a position of oversaturation?
Yeah, well, certainly, yeah. Everybody I think is drawn to, they're going to find who they're drawn to. And some people like my stuff. Some people probably hate my stuff. It's just the nature of it. And so it's just, we have lots and lots more choices now. It's sort of like, I live in San Diego and there's a million restaurants here.
But this is not necessarily what I mean by this. What I mean by this, we have a Bobby Joe starting Jiu-Jitsu today. And the likelihood of them seeing Jiu-Jitsu before they start is extremely high. Like you can't avoid it. Like you just, you got to live under the rock, right?
Yeah.
But then you go to Bobby Joe goes into the academy. He goes through classes. He loves his instructor and he gets online. How to pass the guard. And he gets literally 20 million videos.
Right.
I mean, literally, and probably half of those videos might be done incorrectly. So we'll just ignore those. Okay. Every video is amazing. But I often say you get 100 black belts in the room, ask them to teach the same technique, and you get 100 different versions.
Right.
There will be small things that will adjust per person.
Yep.
So now you have millions of videos how to do one pass differently.
Yeah.
Does this create a confusion? Is this oversaturation with the information? Because one thing is not knowing what you need to learn, but there's another thing where you don't know what to learn because you don't know what's right or what's wrong.
Yeah, and you have no filter by which you can sift through and say, oh, that's good. I need to learn that. No, that's not going to work.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's a double-edged sword. On the one hand, it's, the golden age of jiu-jitsu, like I said. On the other hand, information overload is a real thing. And you have to distinguish, I think, between knowledge and skill. Those are two very different things. You can watch 20 different guard passing videos. You can, spend all night. In a way, it's entertainment. I think most people, when they're watching jiu-jitsu on YouTube, they're watching one technique, then another, then, I'll listen to him talk for a little bit. I'll watch that. It's just entertainment, ultimately. There's no skill development there because that's, I think, a very different process than knowledge acquisition. Knowledge is a part of skill.
Define this deeper. Knowledge versus skill. In your mind, what's your interpretation?
Well, knowledge is a component of skill, but because jiu-jitsu is a physical discipline, we have to teach our bodies to be able to execute and recognize, have that timing, teach your body to be able to recognize that moment so you're no longer thinking. And it's an interesting paradox in that you have to have a very engaged mind to learn jiu-jitsu, but to execute jiu-jitsu effectively, you have to have a disengaged mind so that you're letting your body do what it's programmed to do. So, skill development takes a lot of repetition, a lot of failure, a lot of shoring up the details, a lot of, consistency there. Knowledge is easier. You can spend an evening watching a bunch of videos. Now you've got knowledge.
So hold on a second. I can't stop myself. So you're saying that I cannot watch a bunch of little short reels and just be amazing at jiu-jitsu?
Well, once you have skill at jiu-jitsu, I think it's very possible to see something and know that you can execute it and be like, oh yeah, I'm going to try that next time in class. And you might hit it and now it's part of your game. But you've built a foundation of skill and knowledge and understanding to be able to do that.
I'm making jokes, but I hear this often that students purchase instructionals and they never watch them.
Yeah.
Or they watch the first video.
Yeah.
and they left it and never touched it again.
Oh,
Right.
I
And
have, the Art of Skill platform. We've got a bunch of videos that we sell, and I can go into the interface and I can see every customer that's purchased and how much they have watched of the videos that they've purchased. And it's almost shocking to me that
yeah.
80% of them have literally never watched 1 minute of the things that they purchased. And the other 20%, probably 80% of them have only watched a little bit of it. It's very few people will actually go through an entire instructional.
Why does this happen then? Why, first of all, why are we spending money for things that we don't care about or don't use? Two, if we have ever intent to use them, well, how come don't we? How come we are not investing our own will into getting better?
Yeah. Well, purchasing is an emotional decision, right?
Oh, absolutely.
And so you capture somebody with a good ad that promises that you're going to get X, Y, and Z. And so in that moment, you're like, ooh, this is what I need. And you make a purchase. But, that's a very different mechanism than actually committing to doing the work, to learning those things. I've tried, every DVD or instructional course that I've ever purchased, I've always watched, just, because again, I'm kind of a jiu-jitsu nerd. And, but I think I'm in the minority there.
Well, I share that thought. I mean, I spend, I have a blocked out amount of time every week that I try to study and then take it to the mat and try to elaborate and lab it and so on.
Mm-hmm.
But not many people do that. I even noticing that a lot of people simply check in, check out. They'll show up for a session, whatever that session is, and brainlessly, they'll just follow the instructions and they leave and they checked out and that's it. How come we are not more strategic about this? How come as we are driving to the academy, we don't think about this? What am I going to work on today? Okay, well, let me work on, I don't know, inside control. Let me work on frames. Let me work on this. Let me work on that. And then actually execute some of this, try it. Wouldn't that make us better?
Yeah, absolutely. And I always recommend that. I say you should have something you're working on at all times. Every time you go to class, you should spend a moment thinking, what do I want to get out of this training session? But again, it's just jiu-jitsu is such a deep, broad art that it can be whatever you want it to be. If it's just a pastime, you just want to go get a workout, get a little stimulation, and when you leave the academy, not even think about jiu-jitsu again, okay, well, that's fine. That's your journey. That's what you're trying to get out of jiu-jitsu.
But don't you think that people would stick around a little bit longer if they were more successful with this? I mean, if we brainlessly step on a mat every single day without thinking about it, and I just want to hang out with my friends, I want to break a sweat and all of this, doesn't that ultimately lead us into the exit at some point of time?
It's a slower process for sure. It's a slower process. And that's an interesting question. Does you having skill in an activity make it less likely that you quit that activity? And I would assume the answer is yes, because, again, you're learning to play the guitar. You don't even have calluses on your fingers yet. It's hard at first. You can't make the chord shapes easily. And so, you're much more likely to quit in those early stages, that if someone could magically just, okay, you're going to play guitar now, you want to learn it, great, boom, you've got calluses, you've got fingers that are strong enough to do the things, then, it's likely that people would stick with it more. But I don't know. I mean, you have to go through the process, right? It's a difficult process.
This thing is so complex.
Yeah.
And yet we are so addicted to it. We are so drawn to this experience, this experiment in a sense, isn't it?
It's unique. Jiu-jitsu is really unique in a way that other activities aren't. And what's funny, my girlfriend, she knew very little about jiu-jitsu before we got together. But now she just loves being kind of in the jiu-jitsu realm. She really appreciates it now. But she said, I didn't realize how much of a lifestyle this thing is. I just assumed it was like tennis. You go play tennis. When you're done playing tennis, you're probably not, planning your vacation around tennis. You're probably not going to a tennis camp. Probably not, most people probably aren't that into something, but yet jujitsu is something that people get very wrapped into this lifestyle about. So yeah, it's very unique.
It's a good thing, isn't it?
It's why I'm still doing it. I'm OCD. I want to go deep into things that I get interested in, but the flip side is I get bored easily. I've abandoned many things once I achieve some level of mastery in that thing, and oftentimes a year of doing something, and now you've reached,
and yet 20 years later, you're still here.
I'm still here, and I still love it, and it's still just profoundly interesting to me, and continues to be frustrating, and all of the things.
Yeah, for sure. Couple years back, you made a big decision to shift away from the ownership of Jiu-Jitsu Academy, and you focusing on more of a indirect approach, if you will.
Yeah.
What made you do that? That's a big life decision.
Well, the jiu-jitsu school was not my primary business. A small school in Wyoming is not a huge moneymaker. Even though I treated it like a professional, I ran it like a professional academy, and it was a beautiful environment, and the classes ran on time, and I did everything I could to be a great instructor in that environment. But it wasn't really my main hustle. I had a software company that I owned that ultimately I had to shut it down. It's kind of a long, painful story. Ultimately, it's a story of failure. And all I had at that point was my jiu-jitsu academy. And I was so burnt out on tech. I had done it, most of my life, and I didn't want to go back into it. So I was at this crossroads where I didn't know what I was going to do with my life. But I love jiu-jitsu, and I had my YouTube channel. And so it was really Roy Dean who encouraged me to get out of Wyoming. He said, look, that environment is not serving you. Sell your school, come to California. You can move into my house for 6 months. He wasn't going to be there. And so I did. I moved into his house for 6 months. And ultimately I ended up down here in San Diego. Some doors began to open and some opportunities. And I thought, well, I'm not sure that opening another school is in the cards. Although I tell you what, I love owning a school. And part of me, if the right opportunity came along, maybe some unique place somewhere in the world that was, interesting and unique, I would probably be game for something like that, because I love it. I love being on the mat every day. I love teaching, and I feel like
what's so unique about having your own place that draws you to it?
Well, when I left Roy Dean's academy, I trained in Maui for a year. I trained in Maine for a few years. I trained in Florida. I trained all over the place. And I got to experience a lot of different jiu-jitsu environments. And I always felt like I missed Roy's environment. There was, sometimes those first experiences you have in jiu-jitsu really shape how you see the world. And that first academy you train in, there's a real bond there. So when I opened my school, in a sense, it was my attempt to recreate what I had lost. And so I ran my classes very much in the model of how Roy Dean runs his instruction. And so I tried to create that environment. So some of the appeal was that I was creating an environment that was the type that I would really love to train in. So it may be a little selfish in that sense. But there's just something special about the mats. And every time I walk into a jiu-jitsu training room, you feel a little adrenaline, a little excitement. And, it's just very special. And I really love it.
Is that what you miss about it now? That structure, that
yeah,
connection with your students?
I miss that. And I think I also miss, I'm teaching regularly. It's not that I don't teach, but I don't have daily obligations to go teach, which means I don't keep my head in the game in a way that I would if I had to teach, 2 lesson plans today. There's something about that. mental discipline of having to just have your mind in jiu-jitsu so much. And I miss that because I feel like I was on a faster developmental track in terms of my understanding of jiu-jitsu than I am now. Now I mostly train for myself, and I teach, privates and small groups, and I do camps and retreats, and I teach here and there. But it's different. It's not quite the same. Sometimes you're recycling the same lesson plan because you're two different groups that are separated by time and space.
Regrets
of selling it?
Yeah.
No, because overall my life is incredible now. It's I've.
Do you consider yourself a lucky cat? Are you the luckiest guy in the world? Are you living a dream?
I mean, life you
don't have to be humble. You can say it. It's okay.
Well, I don't know. That's a hard question to answer. Am I living the dream? Well, the dream would be unlimited resources and, a lifestyle that I don't have right now. I mean, that would be the dream. But I am living a dream, or I'm living the dream in the sense that I'm doing what I love to do. And so it's not work. I don't feel like I work for a living. I just am involved in this beautiful art of jiu-jitsu, and I'm passionate about it. And so, yeah, in that sense, I am living a dream, and I get to go to unique places. I'm, working on setting up a retreat in Italy, and I'm working on another one in Costa Rica, and I'm working, so it's, I get to
Are you a little humble right now? And I'm just thinking about this. You have thousands of followers on YouTube, and that's a big footprint for you. Yeah. And many people follow you on social media. A lot of people look up at Rick Ellis and they say, damn, I mean, I wish I had this. This is OG. This is the man.
What's funny is my girlfriend always tells me, she says, dude, you are the reluctant hero. Embrace it. People look up to you. Embrace that role, because I'm not entirely comfortable. I'm just the guy who loves jiu-jitsu. I love sharing it. I'm nothing special. I started way too late in life. I think I've got some talent for it. Maybe more than some, not as much as others. So, I don't take, and I try not to take myself too seriously, because I don't want to become egotistical and live for the dopamine of the social media likes and all that stuff. And we're all susceptible to that. I'll push a video out and it'll underperform, and then I'll feel bad about it. And, and then I'm telling myself, no, this is, I was talking to Roy Dean the other day, funny enough. And he said, you know what? YouTube needs to be your personal art project, and you just do it for yourself. You don't care whether you're getting likes or views or anything. You're just doing what you want to do and not overthink it too much. So yeah, I try to stay humble. And man, you get smashed 10,000 times in jiu-jitsu over the years, and you're going to be a lot more humble. We would hope.
Well, good for you. Good for you. I think you are humble. I think you are underplaying, in my opinion, at least. The significance of your footprint and the impact that you are making. But look,
I appreciate that. I do appreciate. What's funny is when I hear feedback like that, or I get a lot of messages and DMs and emails every week. I get messages from people that tell me their story. People seem to have this desire to tell me their story a lot of times. And sometimes these stories are just amazing. They are, touching and heartfelt, that the things that people go through out there, and they will point to something I said or something, a video I did, and say, that really changed my track. I'm doing this thing today because of something you said. And so, yeah, I'm very moved by that. And I'm very, it's those messages that I think keep me motivated to keep doing this in a way.
Well, keep doing it. I think we need more guys like you. I think we need more people with good intentions and no ego, and just simply doing it because we love it. And I think the world would be a very different place if everybody did that way. So I appreciate that.
Thank you, Thomas. I appreciate hearing that.
Oh, absolutely. Listen, we've been at this for nearly an hour and a half, so I do want to be
Wow.
respectful of your time, and we do have to wrap this up at some point. But before we do that, again, speaking of that online footprint that you do have, talk a little bit about this. Where are you at? For those who haven't had the opportunity to connect with you, where can you be found? Where are the websites? What's the YouTube channel? Let's get to the meat and potatoes of really what's important here.
Well, my main communication platform is YouTube. I am the Art of Skill on YouTube, and you can just type in Rick Ellis or Art of Skill on YouTube and I'll come up. You can find me at my personal website, which is rickellis.com. I also run the artofskill.com, which is our video platform, and we're trying to grow it and continue to add instructional media there. And also, I have a website at oldgrapplersummit.com, and that is our over 40 retreat that we do. And I've got one coming up this October at a beautiful 240-acre retreat center outside of San Diego in the mountains. We're bringing in multiple instructors. I'll be one of the instructors. Roy Dean will be there. Clark Gracie will be there. Miles Lucas will be there. And it's beautiful, kind of a high-end facility, beautiful accommodations, and it's going to be amazing. We don't even have it all completely planned out, all the activities and things that we're planning to do. But that's at oldgrapplersummit.com. And I think those are the main places. You can find me on Facebook, friend me on Facebook, on Instagram. I'm Rick Ellis HQ. On TikTok, I'm Rick Ellis HQ, although I do very little on that platform. Those are my main.
And as always, I will make sure that all of these links are posted in the show notes of this episode. So if you guys want to reach out directly to Rick, feel free to do it. What an amazing resource and amazing things that he does on a regular basis to really improve this experience, this complex and sometimes it feels like difficult experience for us. So we should take advantage of these. Rick, thank you for being here. Thank you for coming back on the show. Thank you for being here. And if you guys want to dig into his story, like actual life story, check out the episode 151. That's the first one we did about 3 years ago, almost 3 years ago. But Rick, thank you for being here. Thank you for sharing your mind, your philosophy, and being vulnerable and talking to me, because sometimes, it's hard to do these things. So I appreciate you being here and sharing some of the experiences with us. And as always, I'll be sitting back on the sidelines and watching the amazing things that you always continue on doing.
Thank you, Thomas. And you're a great interviewer. And I applaud you for continuing to do this podcast year after year after year. And you're a great resource as well in this realm, giving people a platform to talk about jiu-jitsu. So I appreciate being here, and anytime, man, I'll come back anytime.
Absolutely. Let's wrap it up for today.
Thank you for listening to RŌL Radio. If you enjoyed the show, don't forget to leave us a review and help us make the show even more amazing. For future episodes, check out our website and follow us on all major podcast platforms. Take care.